want to show you a saw I'm very proud of. This is a chainsaw, high quality chainsaw, which I purchased back in, it must have been the late fall of 2001. I was pretty young in the fall of 2001, and so this was the very first chainsaw I ever personally bought. Till then, I'd used my father's chainsaws, but they would always tear up on me. They would always quit halfway through the job for a couple of reasons. One is I didn't really operate them correctly. And the second reason is that my daddy, bless his heart, with all his good characteristics, he's always loved to buy cheap stuff. And he's never really grasped that principle that you get what you pay for. And so if I was going to buy a chainsaw, and I wanted it to last the rest of my life, I was going to get a good one. I was going to get the best one money could buy. So I went to the best and only chainsaw dealer in our town. They carried Steels and Husqvarna. And I told the man, I want a good chainsaw. I don't want no light green pulling, and I don't want no lightweight McCullough. I want something that's going to work. And last me, he said, well, now this, I understand this has changed. Manufacturers has changed. But at that time, he said, well, then you're going to want a Steel or a Husqvarna. At that time, Husqvarnas were made in some of the same places that Steels were, and they were comparable, same level of quality. I think that may have changed now for the Husqvarnas, but I got one of the good ones. And they were about the same price, but there was a $10 rebate on the Husqvarna, so obviously I have a Husqvarna. I saved that $10. And I bought the saw and started to walk out the door, but the man said, whoa, wait, young man. Said, whenever anybody buys a Steel or a Husqvarna chainsaw, we give you a free lesson on how to care for them, how to maintain them, how to keep them running well. And I said, I already know how to run a chainsaw. He said, well, you may know how to run one, but we're going to give you a lesson anyway. And he was an older fella, and you do what the older folks say. And I went out back with him, and sure enough, he taught me some things about a chainsaw that I'll just say he was more specific than my daddy ever was. And he taught me some things that were pretty basic, obviously, things a lot of you already know. Explained to me how the bar chain oil is calibrated or engineered to where it runs out at the same time your mixed gas does. He showed me how to take the blade on and off, showed me how to sharpen a blade, showed me how tight the blade was supposed to be. He said, pull it up, and the bottom of the teeth should barely be off the bar. He went through the instructions on how to make it crank, even if it hadn't been started in a long, long time. Said, push this button in to release your tension, pull your choke. He said, you're going to have to pull it probably 3 times before you hear anything. But sometimes you will hear that on the first, which means you go. Now that is an old chainsaw which works just as well as it did the day I bought it because I've cared for it in all the ways that man taught me to. And of all the lessons he taught me, how to crank it and make it work wasn't the most important thing he had to say that day. Do you know what the most important thing he said to me was? He said it over and over and over again until I got tired of hearing it. He said, keep your blade sharp. do not cut wood with a dull blade. And that confused me a little bit because I'd cut a lot of wood with a lot of dull blades. Had a terrible time doing it, burned up a lot of chainsaws, but I didn't realize there was a connection between the two. And here's the way the man explained it to me. He said, once your blade gets dull, once those teeth get dull, it can happen so easily. It can happen through use or nicking a rock, whatever. But once your blade gets dull, it will still continue to cut for a while. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to find that as you're cutting, you're going to have to press even harder and harder and harder and almost mash your way through the log. And you're going to notice your saw begin to smoke and it's going to get very, very hot. And he said you're going to start showing these black smut marks on the front. And he said, the more you bear down, here's your gut instinct is going to say, whoa, I'm in a hurry. I'm burning daylight. I've got a couple of boys, teenage boys helping me here. I've got so much I've got to get cut. I want it under the shed before it rains tonight. And you're going to be pressed. And you're going to be, something from the inside is going to push you to keep going. Because you know to stop and sharpen a blade. A lot of y'all know what I'm talking about. Those little skinny pencil-looking things that sharpen each individual blade. You got one of those. It can take you a long time to do that. It'll be dark by the time you finish. And if you take it to a dealership and get your blade sharpened there, you got to stop what you're doing and go get one, all that. And so your temptation, or your natural inclination is what I'd call it. Not a temptation. A natural inclination is just keep going. Keep going. And the longer you cut, the harder it gets, the hotter your saw gets, and also the more crooked your cuts get, by the way. Michael, you know what I'm talking about. A lot of you do. Because you got blades on each side pointing at different angles. Every other one is different. And if you happen to dull a couple of the ones on the right side, then and the ones on the other side are still sharp, you're going to make a crooked cut. And you cannot hold it straight. It's going to make a crooked cut, which will in the end make the whole thing way harder for whatever poor soul is going to be splitting that wood after you get through with your hot, heavy work. And so, what he was teaching me was a principle I'd recently read from Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I want to throw those up on the screen and emphasize number 7, because number 7 is what's related, obviously, to my saw, but more importantly, it's important to all you Husqvarnas and all you Pullens and all you lightweight McCullers out there in the audience, because you are the saw. Your mind, your body, your spirit is a saw. So real quick, the 7 habits of highly effective people, things that highly effective people learn to do. They do things that ineffective people don't do, and they do them consistently. Some of these, be proactive, begin with the end in mind, know where you're going. Put first things first, think win-win. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Synergize, but the biggie that I'm talking about today, sharpen your saw. Now and then, you got to stop and sharpen your saw. Whether you feel like you have time to do it or not. Here's the thing. most of the time when chainsaw operators don't want to stop and sharpen their saw, it's not because they're lazy. It's because they're so driven and motivated, they're not willing to give up that time, that 30 minutes or whatever it would take. So they wear out their saw prematurely. They make things a whole lot harder on themselves. And ultimately, the job winds up taking much, much longer. And that is a principle, sharpening the saw, that is communicating some of the very same things that the fourth commandment is meant to communicate. I want to read that to you from the book of Deuteronomy, the full commandment from the book of Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 12 through 15. Here we go. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest, dedicated to the Lord your God. Pay attention to two things in that one sentence. It's a day of rest for you. God's not the one that needs rest. We are. It's a day of rest. It's also a day dedicated to the Lord your God. Here again, what I want to make sure you see is that this commandment is interested in keeping not only your body in good running condition, but also your soul. Keeping your soul sharp, calibrated, aligned, and in tune. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. That includes you, your sons, your daughters, your male and female servants, your oxen, donkeys, other livestock, and any foreigners living among you. All your male and female servants must rest as you do. And this is a significant line. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt. This is written to the Hebrew people. But the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That's why your Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. Now, if you're like me, you'd immediately maybe ask, okay, I get the sharpen the saw thing. I see where you want to make sure to rest your body, renew your soul. But what does that have to do with having been slaves in Egypt? Well, to those people, it had everything to do. Because think about it. When they were slaves in Egypt, these Hebrews, they worked 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There was never a break of any kind. And they were basically worked and worked until they were completely worn out, and then they were worked some more until they worked themselves to death, because so far as their taskmasters were concerned, these people have no value anyway. When this one keels over, we'll just bring in another brick stomper and bricklayer. And so, first of all, God is saying, maybe your former masters didn't care about your well-being or you having any kind of abundant, satisfying, healthy life, but I do. You're no longer slaves. And we're building this in, and it was a way of giving dignity to a group of people who had previously had none. Also, during their time of slavery, if you read the book of Exodus, Pharaoh would not allow them the time or the opportunity to go anywhere beside the workshop, the work site, and do their worship service, keep their spiritual lives going, and pass on their spiritual heritage to their children. There was no opportunity to do that. That was not allowed. And so God builds in the Sabbath because you have dignity and I care about your physical well-being. You also are here for a reason. They'd been given a divine purpose, these people. And in order to stay in tune with who they were and why they were in this world, they needed regular days set aside to remind them what mattered most and to bring their souls in line with that, to be spiritually renewed. Now you're starting to see that this whole Sabbath commandment was not it was not some negative, restrictive thing that was meant to take all the fun out of life or prevent them from doing anything joyful, meaningful, anything that would replenish them on this certain day of the week. No. It was a rule, but it was a rule meant to make them shut off the saw and sharpen it every single week, whether they thought they needed it or not. And even if the saw didn't need sharpening, it still needed a day to cool down, because saws get so hot when they're run constantly. And so it is with the human body. So it is with the human mind. Now, obviously, there have always been people, and still are people, who will take a principle from the Bible, which all of which really were in one way or another intended to be a blessing, to somehow protect us, to keep us in a healthy position with God and ourselves and other people. But there have always been people that try to take those kinds of commandments and turn them into very rigid, negative, restrictive rules. Now, I don't even have time to explain and remind you how the religious legal teachers did that in Jesus' day. They were constantly getting on to Jesus because he would do things on the Sabbath day that were all about feeding people, helping people, renewing people, bringing health and life. But they were so rigid in their understanding of what the Sabbath was about that they thought he was some kind of heretic, and they thought he was going against the Scriptures. Here's what Jesus said to them. I'm going to read to you in two different translations. This is Mark 2:27. Here's the deal. Jesus said, you've got something backwards here. If you think the Sabbath is some sort of joy killer, you've missed the whole point. So here it is from one translation. I think this is NIV. He said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The whole reason the Sabbath was established was for your sake. It is there to serve you, not the other way around. But boy, rigid thinking people who love to control, and there's a little bit in all of us that likes to control other people. Some of us allow that to grow. Others recognize that it's hard enough to control ourselves. And so we just focus mainly on that. And because we do, we develop in such Christ-like, increasingly loving ways that we wind up influencing other people, not controlling. Here's another way of saying it. Same verse, different translation. This is a New Living Translation that I usually read from. The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. Same idea, just put in a different way, the whole idea. This is here not to squash you with its requirement. This is here to liberate you, to nourish you, to replenish you. But in every culture who's ever tried to apply this, there have been people who did the old legalistic Jewish thing and tried to construct a bunch of real nitpicky rules regarding the Sabbath. My grandfather, for example, on my mother's side, was born in 1910. And for the first 20 years of his life, or 30, none of us actually here remember those days. I'm sure you knew people who did remember those days, but that was before the 5-day work week was invented. That seems to have began coming along after World War II, but throughout most of history, and in the early 1900s still, everybody worked 6 days a week. Obviously, if you're on the farm, but even factories, 6-day week. And the only day that you weren't working, that you weren't in, especially in a Bible-based culture, which probably means the further south you were, you weren't even allowed to do any kind of work on the Sabbath. All the stores were closed, I'm told, not that I remember that. The only business open was the church. And that was a social system adapted to put this principle into effect. Give everybody, rich, poor, bosses, workers, everybody, a day to rest and to worship. They got that opportunity. But there was apparently some preachers who decided that we needed to get a little more specific about it and lay down some real hard, fast restrictions about what you can and can't do and what constitutes work and what doesn't constitute work, just like the Pharisees did. And my granddaddy taught me, my granddaddy, as a 75-year-old man, would not fish on Sunday afternoon after church, even though he was going to be going back that night to church. No fishing on Sunday, because he was taught, he had it preached rather loud. You don't fish on Sunday. And you know what? Apparently some preacher even threw in there, and he swallowed it, and it hooked him deep. If you fish on Sunday, you will stick a hook in your finger and not be able to get it out. Now I want you to think about that. How replenishing was that? I realized that the older folks, to take a nap on Sunday afternoon, the older I get, the more of a blessing that is. That's refreshing. And people would sit around on the porch, and the adults would talk. But man, if you are an 11-year-old boy, the last thing you want to do is take a nap. And you don't give a hoot what the old folks are talking about. You want to go fishing. And if it's a 6-day work week, even for kids, that is the one day you could spend the whole afternoon fishing and thereby replenish your soul and come back refreshed, recreated, and renewed, and ready to go to work Monday morning. But legalism doesn't allow for that kind of thing. Which is why Jesus said, oh, you teachers of the law, you bind people with heavy burdens that are so difficult to bear. Unnecessarily. But he said, come to me, my burden's light, and it's not so hard as you would think. Well, let me say a bit about recreation before I run out of time here. You ever thought about the word recreation? I'm sure half of you have. It comes from the word creation. Creation. Recreate. God made us. God created us. But life in God's world has a way of wearing us down, dulling our blades. The blades of our mind, our bodies, our soul. You ever heard the old saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy? It will also give Jack a dull, blunt soul that is just sort of struggling and pushing ahead through life with no real end or break in sight, out of touch with who put him here and the abundant life Jack could have. Recreation for a lot of people, a nap is good. Sitting on the porch, watching TV is good. Even video games can be good. Watching a game, even if there's no educational value, every now and then, that can recreate you. You didn't think a preacher would say that, did you? It can. But other people need active recreation because it produces adrenaline. Now, there are some people who are already very given to recreation. They just get a little carried away. Yesterday, I texted John Mesco over here. Why are you here today, John? I specifically said to him, do not come to church tomorrow because I'm preaching on the need for recreation, and this is not a sermon you need to hear. Because some of us, if anything, lean toward having, what is that saying? I ain't never had too much fun. Actually, I got to add a parenthesis. John Mesco worked really hard and went to med school, and he went really hard and did some hard things, and now he's enjoying the fruits of his labor. Point's still the same, though. The last thing some people need is encouragement for more recreation. But there's a lot of us who do. That's the thing about preaching. No matter what you preach on, it's always going to apply to certain people and not others. You decide how this applies to you. Let me make a couple of clarifications to close with. Some of us are built, wired, put together out of really strong, tough materials. Some of us are like steel chainsaws. Others of us, not quite so hardy. We're more like pulling chainsaws. It doesn't take as much to wear us out or to break us down. But the bottom line is this. A steel chainsaw who's well built, if you're one of those people who's just naturally hardy, robust, you can take a lot. Good. That is a wonderful thing. You're going to get more done than a lot of people. And you'll probably be able to keep working and accomplishing for longer periods of time than those pulling chainsaws are able to. But remember one thing, don't get too arrogant about that and get judgmental about the people who are pullings, who aren't made quite as hardy and strong as you, and who can't take it as well as you. Because here's the deal. Remember this, whether you are a steel chainsaw or a pulling, you did not make yourself. You didn't select the material that you were going to be born of. You didn't choose your DNA. You didn't make yourself. So don't get overly proud if you're really, really strong. Also, don't be overly down on yourself if you're just naturally not. Okay? A couple of scriptures. Psalm 100, verse 3. Know that it is the Lord God. It is God who made us and not we ourselves. Be careful about taking a lot of credit for things you really had nothing to do with. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, what we do with what we're given, that is significant. We do choose that. But what we come here with is something we were given. 1 Corinthians 4:7 follows right on that. Who made you superior to others? Didn't God give you everything you have? Again, he's talking about your natural abilities, whether you're a steel or a lightweight McCullough. Well then, how can you boast as if what you have were not a gift? I'll say this too. Whatever brand and make you are, whatever you're made of, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Because whether you're a steel or a pulling chainsaw, you do have limits. And if you want to maximize your longevity, maximize the work you're able to do for yourself, your family, and others, then make sure you're stopping to sharpen that saw every week in your soul and in your body. And find activities that do that for you. You know, one thing that renewed my soul last Monday. Monday's the day I take off, by the way. It's because I've learned through the years, Monday after Sunday, that's the only day of the week that I'm able to not think about next Sunday that's coming. And it's the only day of the week I can get my work off my mind enough to get some renewal and recreation. So that's Monday for me. And by the way, I keep meaning to mention this for the last 6 weeks and I always forget. Just know that's my Sabbath day. And if you got an emergency, by all means call me. But if it's anything that can wait until Tuesday, please don't text me about it, because I'm trying real hard to sharpen my saw. What I did last Monday, I went to a creek, beautiful, fast-moving, clear, cold creek, running under a concrete bridge. But I noticed there were these limbs that had gotten stuck under there, trees and big branches, and you couldn't even swim through. I spent 2 hours pulling limbs out from under that. I felt like a little kid building a dam from years ago. And by the time I was done, my body was tired, but my soul felt clear and clean. You know, there's an old saying, one form of relaxation is simply a different form of work than what you're used to. So tomorrow, I'll be taking my wife to that creek that isn't stopped up with limbs, and we're going to put on our goggles and go swimming through that clear water, looking at the fish like we're in the Bahamas. Yeah. Find what feeds your soul and do it. Work hard. Work hard. Give all you can. Make sure, all of us are takers. You can't live in this world without receiving. But have you noticed? All of us are takers in one way or another, to some degree or another, but not all of us are givers. Make sure you work and rest in a healthy enough cycle so that you can give as much as you receive. Stay sharp. Whatever day that means for you, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy.